Hi, my name is Ardelia, and I used to believe that love alone could hold a family together. My son and his fiancée threw an engagement party I wasn't invited to. Then they got married and made sure I wasn't part of that either. They erased me from the photos, the speeches, even the stories they told about where they came from. And then, months later, he called and asked if I was still hosting Thanksgiving. Can you imagine being asked to set the table for people who never saved you a seat? I didn't slam a door. I didn't scream. But I did make one decision that changed everything. Do you want to hear what happened when they showed up anyway? The mornings had grown quieter lately. Maybe it was the season. Late winter always made the air hang heavier, but something else weighed on the space between my kitchen walls. I stood at the counter, waiting for the coffee to finish dripping, and glanced at my phone resting near the fruit bowl. The family group chat hadn't buzzed in days, not since the brief flurry about Vera's new job anyway. Dorian hadn't sent me a single direct message all week. It wasn't unusual for him to be busy, but there used to be check-ins, photos of his lunch, random thoughts, the "Mom, what's your chili recipe again?" kind of texts. That casual closeness had vanished. Slowly enough, I didn't notice until it was gone. Now I noticed. I wiped the counter, poured myself a mug, and scrolled through our old messages just to feel something familiar. They were filled with warmth, sarcasm, emojis, inside jokes from when he was still my son, and not just Vera's fiancé. I stared at the last message he had sent me, a thumbs up 3 weeks ago. I placed my thumb over it, like somehow I could press it back into motion. With a sigh, I typed out something new. Let me know if you need help with the invitations. I'd love to pitch in. I hesitated a moment, then hit send. Seconds later, the seen checkmark appeared, but that was it. No response, no typing bubbles, just nothing. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was in the middle of a meeting or driving or dealing with something, but then hours passed, and then a day. By the next morning, I checked it more times than I cared to admit. I knew the silence wasn't accidental, and the worst part, it didn't even come with the courtesy of an argument, just absence. That night, I sat in bed replaying our last phone call in my mind. I couldn't recall saying anything wrong. Vera had mentioned something vague. We're keeping things small, nothing fancy. When I'd asked about wedding details. At the time, I'd assumed she meant avoiding extravagance, but maybe small meant not for me. That phrase stuck in my chest, heavy like bad weather. Sunday came, and I found myself at the church ladies' brunch, smiling too easily. I was telling Loretta and June, "Oh, they're just busy these days," when someone asked how the wedding plans were going. I didn't even blink, just lied with practiced grace. That's what women like me did. We kept the facade polished, even when it cracked underneath. When I got home, I checked my phone again. Still seen. Still nothing. After dinner, I wandered into the living room and pulled open the drawer where I kept the spare photo paper. I printed out a snapshot from Christmas, the last one where Dorian was grinning like a little boy, again, caught mid-laugh with powdered sugar on his nose. I held it for a moment, considering the empty spot on the hallway wall, but instead I slid it gently into a drawer. No frame, not this time. Something had shifted. I couldn't put a name to it just yet, but I could feel it in my chest. That strange tightening behind the ribs when you're not angry, not sad, just unsure where you stand anymore. And for the first time in years, I didn't know how to be his mother anymore. I wasn't planning to check Facebook that morning. Truth be told, I avoid it unless it's for a recipe or to peek at what the church choir's posting. But there I was, mug in hand, scrolling without purpose while the coffee cooled on the table. Then I saw it, a tag from Joyce Whitaker, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who still popped up now and then in my feed. The photo was bright, almost blinding, under the early spring sun, and it took me a second to understand what I was looking at. White light strung across a backyard I didn't recognize. A long wooden table set with catered hors d'oeuvres, flutes of champagne held high. Dorian and Vera stood in the middle, arms wrapped around each other like a magazine ad. The caption read, "Celebrating love last night with the best people in our lives." Best people. I clicked on the photo and zoomed in. There was Vera's sister, whom I'd met once in passing. One of Dorian's college friends I hadn't heard about since he graduated. Even her yoga instructor was tagged. I kept looking for a face I knew well, someone who might have mentioned it. But no, not one. I scrolled through the comments, dozens of congratulations, heart emojis, and then, so glad all the important people could make it. My stomach didn't drop all at once. It settled, low and slow, like someone pouring cold water into a warm bowl. I closed the app, opened it again. Maybe I'd missed a text, an email, anything. But my inbox was clean. My last message to Dorian still sat there, seen. That same silence humming back at me. I picked up the phone, hands a little too firm on the screen, and dialed his number. 1 ring, 2, voicemail. I hung up before the tone. Vera then. I hesitated, tapped her contact. My thumb hovered a moment before pressing call. She picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Ardelia," she said, chipper. "I just saw the photos," I said. "Oh, right. Yeah, it was just a casual thing. Mostly friends," she answered without pause. Mostly friends. That phrase didn't just sting. It landed like a slap. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, muttered something polite, and ended the call before I let anything sharper escape. I sat with that for a while, letting the quiet expand around me. Outside, the world went on. Cars passing by, the soft clink of someone mowing down the street. I stood up, suddenly aware of how tight my shoulders felt. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door to see Mrs. Donnelly standing there, clutching a Tupperware of lemon bars. "I made too many again," she said with a smile. "Didn't you go to that engagement party last night? Looked fancy." I blinked, quickly crafting a smile. "I had a migraine," I said. "Wasn't up for it." She patted my arm and handed me the container, none the wiser. I watched her shuffle back across the lawn and then shut the door softly behind me. That evening, I sat back down at the table, opened my laptop again, and stared at the same photo. My fingers hovered over the screen. Everyone looked so joyful, so at ease. I wasn't just absent. I was erased. There wasn't an extra chair in the frame, no place I might have belonged. And yet, they all toasted. They raised their glasses to beginnings, to the future, to family, just not mine. I closed the laptop, stood slowly, and walked to the hallway drawer. I pulled it open and found the envelope where I had stored a spare invitation template from Dorian's high school graduation party. I had saved it, sentimental fool that I am, thinking one day he might let me help again. Pick colors, fold menus, maybe even bake a cake. I tore it in half, then in quarters. If I wasn't welcome at their beginning, they shouldn't expect to be invited into what I've built. I ran into Helen at the grocery store on a breezy Thursday morning. The sky had that dusty, pale blue that Houston sometimes gets before a storm, and the air smelled faintly of mulch and brewing rain. I was reaching for a bundle of asparagus when her cart rolled up beside mine. She greeted me with that sing-song, Southern politeness, the kind that always came with just a bit too much cheer. I meant to say, "Thank you," she said, like we'd just been talking yesterday. "That caterer you recommended, just divine. Everything at the party looked perfect." I blinked, one hand still hovering over the produce bin. I hadn't recommended anyone. I hadn't even known she was invited. I managed a nod. "Glad to hear it." "Oh, honey, the whole setup was beautiful," she went on. "Vera did such a lovely job. And seeing Dorian so happy, well, it just did my heart good." I offered another nod and moved toward the checkout, claiming I had a roast in the oven I needed to get home, too. She waved me off with a smile, none the wiser. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my knuckles tight on the steering wheel, that woman's voice bouncing around my skull. The car was silent. No radio, no thoughts worth hearing. When I pulled into the driveway, something by the front porch caught my eye. A box, brown cardboard, taped sloppily with a neon pink sticky note that read, "Misdelivered." I stepped out, picked it up carefully. The return address on the label was Vera and Dorian's, my son's house. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what was inside, my gift. I carried it inside, placed it gently on the kitchen table. My hands unwrapped it slowly, methodically. I had packed this set just 3 weeks ago, an heirloom kitchen collection I'd inherited from my mother, used on holidays and anniversaries, passed down with care. I'd wrapped every item in linen, tied the box with twine, and written a small note, "May this serve you well in your new life." There was no note now, just that sticky square in Vera's sharp, even handwriting. "Misdelivered." I didn't cry. I walked to the sink, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the box like it was something dangerous. My mind floated back to the day Walter and I received it as a wedding gift, both of us grinning over the engraved ladle like it was gold. I remembered the way he kissed the back of my hand that night, saying, "Someday we'll pass this on to someone who understands what a real meal means." I had waited all this time to give it to someone who would treat it with respect, and instead it had been sent back like a wrong number. My fingers rested on the edge of the cardboard, tracing the seam, the tape, the ridges, not a tear in sight. "They didn't return a gift," I whispered aloud to no one. "They returned me." Time seemed to stretch, like the afternoon sunlight filtering in through the kitchen blinds. The box sat there, a quiet witness to all the things I wasn't allowed to be anymore. Hostess, mother, part of the story. After a while, I stood up and carried it through the house, each step heavier than the last. I opened the attic door and climbed slowly, heart beating steady and low. I placed the box in the corner, tucked it back beside a bin of old Christmas ornaments and a stack of photo albums no one had opened in years. Downstairs, I went to my writing desk, pulled out a small, unused thank you card from a drawer and uncapped a pen. I didn't write to anyone, no name, no greeting, just one sentence. "Thank you for teaching me where I stand." I folded it neatly, slid it into its envelope, and placed it beside my morning coffee cup. Some people erase you gently. That's how you don't notice until you're completely gone. I hadn't planned to speak at the book club that night. I'd brought lemon shortbread and a copy of a novel no one had finished, hoping for light chatter and an hour of distraction. The church library smelled of old hymnals and fresh vacuuming, a comfort I'd known for years. But just as Loretta was pouring tea into my cup, someone pressed play on a podcast over the small speaker near the coffee table. "Redefining Boundaries," the cheerful voice announced. And then I heard her, Vera. At first, I thought I'd misheard, but no, there it was again. That polished tone she used when she wanted to sound empathetic and professional. "Sometimes," she said, "love becomes control, especially with older parents who've spent years shaping their children and then forget they're meant to let go." Someone laughed softly. Another murmured, "That's so true." I sat perfectly still, the tea cooling in my lap. I didn't blink, didn't breathe. Her voice filled the room, but it crawled down my spine. She was talking about me, in this room, among women who'd known me longer than she'd known my son. I didn't make a scene. I didn't clear my throat or correct anyone. I simply stood, picked up the shortbread and walked out. The air outside had cooled. Dusk was folding into itself, and the sky turned lavender as I walked back to my car. The streetlights flickered on one by one, and I drove home without the radio. It was the silence I needed. At home, I placed the shortbread on the counter and went straight for the phone. I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I just dialed. 1 ring, 2, then voicemail. No beep. Just a tone that read, "This number is no longer receiving calls." She'd blocked me. Without a word, without a fight, without so much as a warning. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and stared at the phone. My hand didn't tremble, but my stomach did something strange, like it knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I went to the dining room and pulled out a yellow legal pad from the drawer. I sat down and started writing. Not a letter, not a rant, just a list. Every casserole I'd made, every time I bit my tongue, every weekend visit I'd rearranged my schedule for, every word I didn't say when she crossed a line, every moment I'd made excuses for Dorian because he was tired, busy, distracted. I kept going until the list filled both sides. Then I folded it in half, placed it inside the family Bible on the shelf, and closed the cover like a period at the end of a sentence. No more sugarcoating or stepping around their comfort. No more pretending that kindness required silence. They had spoken, through exclusion, through implication, through technology. And now I would speak too. Later that evening, as the cicadas buzzed and the wind shifted through the pecan tree out back, I stood at the kitchen sink and whispered to the dark window in front of me, "If they won't say it out loud, I will." I wasn't shouting. I wasn't even raising my voice. But something in me had turned. I wasn't ready to burn bridges, but I'd stopped fearing the smoke. The text came at 6:47 a.m., just as the sunlight was cutting through the slats in the kitchen blinds. I hadn't even poured my coffee yet. The screen lit up like it always did, same alert tone, same buzz, but this one had weight behind it. Dorian's name, and below it, a message that started with Mom. "Mom, for the sake of peace, we're asking that you not attend the wedding. Please respect our wishes." I read it once, then again. The words didn't change. It was that last sentence, "respect our wishes," that lingered, sticky and sharp, as if my presence were a violation, as if I hadn't earned a place there. I set the phone down beside the sink, suddenly more awake than I'd felt in days. An hour later, the phone rang again. I recognized the name, Callista. She'd always been the diplomat of the family, the one who smoothed over tension with a soft voice and too many "I understands." I answered because I wanted to believe she might bring some clarity. "Aunt Ardelia," she began, "I know things are messy right now, but I wanted to check in." I stayed quiet, waiting. "I just think," she continued carefully, "that maybe it's not personal. You know how Vera is. She's sensitive. Dorian's just trying to keep the peace. It's not about excluding you. It's about their comfort." There it was again. Comfort. Their comfort. "You've always been so strong," she added. "Maybe this is just one of those times you rise above." I didn't argue. I thanked her, told her I appreciated her reaching out. But once we hung up, I stood in the center of my living room and let the silence wrap around me. I wasn't angry, not in the shouting sense. I was finished with explanations that demanded me to shrink myself just so others could breathe easy. I pulled a yellow notepad from the drawer beside the fridge and sat down at the table. On one side was a leftover grocery list: canned beans, dish soap, cat food. On the other, I wrote one word at the top in large, clear script: dignity. Below it, I started listing every instance I had stepped aside, stayed silent, made room, bitten my tongue. Birthday plans changed last minute. Thanksgiving meals served without help. Her comments I laughed off. His silences I covered for. The list grew until the ink began to fade. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I picked up the phone once more and dialed Dorian. He answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom." "Hi," I said evenly. "I got your message." A beat passed. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said. "I'm sure you didn't," I replied. "But you made it like this." Look, it's not about... If peace means pretending I don't exist, don't be surprised when I stop showing up. He went quiet. "I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be," I added, my voice steady. "I won't be in the way. I won't be there." I ended the call before he could reply. I'd said what needed saying. That evening, I took a marker and circled Thanksgiving on the wall calendar. Then I grabbed a sticky note and wrote, "Dinner, just those who want me there." I pressed it next to the date, aligning it neatly beneath the month. This time, I wouldn't chase a seat at the table. I'd set my own. The email came on a Monday morning. Subject line soft and vague. Just wanting peace. I clicked it before my coffee even finished brewing, already bracing for the polished disappointment it promised. Vera's tone, as always, was civil, controlled. She opened with, "We respect your position and understand this is a challenging time for everyone." I scanned down the screen, searching for one word. Sorry, it never came. Instead, there were phrases like, "We hope for peace, moving forward," and "We are doing what's best for our future together." Not a single acknowledgement of what had actually happened. No mention of the box I'd received back like a rejected parcel. No recognition of the months of silence that stretched between us. She was extending the kind of olive branch that required me to disappear entirely from the picture. I closed the laptop and sat at the table for a while, letting the silence fill in the words she hadn't written. Outside, birds chirped as if nothing in the world had shifted. Later that day, I decided to go to the church, not for a service, but to drop off a few books to the small library by the office. As I passed the main hallway, I noticed they had updated the Families of the Year board. There, among the rows of smiling faces and pastel photo frames, was a new addition. Dorian and Vera standing arm in arm at a food drive. Underneath was a small brass plate for outstanding commitment to community. I stood there frozen, unsure what stung more, that they were being celebrated as some ideal of compassion, or that no one had thought to remove the photo of Dorian and me, taken almost 20 years ago, still hanging further down the hall. It was faded, the frame dusty. I reached out, brushed my thumb against the glass. The little boy in that picture had brought me dandelions and drawings that said, "Best mom ever." Now, he stood beside someone else, rewriting the history of who got to be called family. I returned home just before dusk. The air smelled like fresh mulch and the hint of something blooming too early. My phone buzzed on the counter as I stepped inside. It was Carolyn, a longtime friend of my late husband. "I thought you'd want to know," she said gently. "I was at the rehearsal dinner. Your in-laws' pictures, they weren't on the main table. They were moved to the side with the decorations." She hesitated before adding, "And someone gave a toast about found family and how blood doesn't always mean love." I thanked her and hung up, not trusting my voice to do more. That night, I stood in the living room, staring at the mantel. Slowly, I began pulling down every frame. Photos of my parents, my husband in his army uniform, our wedding picture, a birthday party with Dorian holding up 5 fingers. I dusted each one, polished the glass, and lined them up anew. Then I lit a single candle, not in mourning, but in honor. For the first time in months, I reclaimed that space, not as a backdrop for grief, but as a declaration of who and what had shaped me. When the room was still and the flame flickered low, I climbed the attic stairs and pulled out the box labeled reunion photos. Among them was a group shot from 5 years ago. Dorian, Vera, and me standing near the grill at the lake. I studied it a moment. We looked content. I removed the frame, slipped the picture into a manila envelope, and placed it beside the boxed kitchen set. Both now lived on a shelf in the attic, tucked neatly away, not discarded, but no longer on display. They made it clear where I belonged. Now, I'll make it clear where they don't. It was during fellowship coffee after Sunday service when I heard it. I was stacking chairs in the side hall when 2 women near the punch bowl leaned in, whispering with the kind of delight only gossip can spark. One of the bridesmaids told me Vera gave a toast about how hard it is to build a life when you've come from dysfunction, one said. The other chuckled. She said it takes strength to walk away from toxic family patterns. Can you imagine saying that with the groom's mother right there? She wasn't, the first replied. She wasn't invited. I didn't move. My hands froze mid-lift. They didn't know I was behind them. They didn't know I was the dysfunction in question. I finished stacking chairs, thanked the coordinator with a polite nod, and slipped out without saying another word. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. I opened Instagram, not something I usually do, but I had a strange compulsion to see it for myself. And there it was, Dorian and Vera, standing proudly beside a long oak dining table, the very one I had gifted them, the one Walter and I had picked out 30 years ago as a housewarming splurge when we moved into our first real home. The caption read, "So grateful to have this beautiful piece passed down from Dorian's dad. We'll build new traditions around it." I stared at those words. From Dorian's dad. Walter had been gone 8 years. That table had never been in his possession, not even for a day. It had lived in my dining room until last fall. I'd polished it before handing it over, wrapped the chairs myself. I remembered placing a note inside one of the drawers. Every meal shared here should be honest. The comments below the post made it worse. Love a strong father-son legacy. He must have taught him so much. What a heritage. Heritage. From a man who never even picked that table out. From a son who didn't have the courtesy to correct them. I closed the app, left the phone face down on the counter, and grabbed my purse. I needed quiet. Real quiet. I walked the few blocks to the local library. It was mostly empty, except for the elderly librarian who greeted me with a tired smile. I wandered back to the genealogy section, letting my fingers graze the spines of old volumes and forgotten names. I sat down with a book titled How We Record Legacy and flipped through yellowed pages. Families documented over decades, marriages, births, milestones, all typed and preserved. I sat there for a long time wondering, who decides what's remembered? Who controls the story when the ones who lived it aren't allowed to tell it? When I got home, I went to the hall closet and pulled out 2 large boxes of photos. I set up the scanner I hadn't used in years. My hands moved steadily, one photo at a time, documenting every birthday, every Easter egg hunt, every summer trip. On the back of each picture, I added a post-it. Dorian's 5th birthday, I baked the cake. First day of kindergarten, I held his hand until the bell. High school graduation, he cried in the car after. I created a digital folder titled What They Forgot. And then I selected one photo, an old one from a family picnic at the lake. Dorian was 10, and I had him on my lap, both of us holding dripping watermelon slices. His eyes were squinting from the sun. Mine were closed from laughing too hard. I printed it, found an envelope. No return address, no note. I slipped the photo in, sealed it, and walked it down to the mailbox. If they're going to rewrite our story, I'll make sure the ink never dries. The envelope arrived just before noon, plain and cream-colored, with my address typed neatly in the center. No return label, no markings to hint at its sender. I knew it was from them the moment I touched it. The paper was thick, the kind used for wedding invitations or glossy announcements. But this was something else. Inside was a photograph, a print, not digital, not a link to click. Someone had taken the time to have it made. 47 faces beamed at me from the image, posed beneath a floral arch, dressed in carefully curated joy. Vera at the center, her dress hugging her like a secret. Dorian to her right, smiling with the kind of polish I barely recognized. There were colleagues, second cousins I hadn't seen since his high school graduation, even their dog in a tiny bow tie, not one frame of me. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in looping script, family means everything. I set it down on the table. The air in the room thickened, the silence pressing against my ribs like it meant to hollow me out. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I stood slowly and cleared the counter as if the act of doing something, anything, might keep me upright. 2 days later, the phone rang while I was tending to my backyard azaleas. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up without checking the ID. "Hey, Mom," Dorian said, his voice bright, too casual. "We were wondering, are you still hosting Thanksgiving this year? We'd love to swing by." Swing by, like it was a store, like I was still the default. I leaned against the garden bench, the sun warming my back. "You want to come to Thanksgiving?" "Well, yeah. I mean, unless you've got other plans." I paused just long enough to let the silence answer for me. "I'll let you know," I said, then hung up before he could fill the gap with another polished lie. That evening, I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing down names, people who had shown up, not in the flashy, performative way, but quietly. My neighbor Linda, who always brought over a pot of chili after rainstorms. Marcia from church, who once sat with me for an hour in the parking lot just because I didn't want to cry alone. My cousin Ruth, who'd called after the engagement photo went viral, saying, "You deserve to be in that frame." By the time I was done, I had a guest list. Memorial Day weekend came with a stretch of sun and enough humidity to curl even the most stubborn hair. I spent the morning slicing peaches and marinating chicken. The table was smaller now, just enough for the people who asked how I was doing and meant it. Candles flickered in simple glass jars. Plates didn't match, and I didn't care. Nothing about this meal was for show. The doorbell rang at 5:07 p.m. I was standing at the stove, turning the corn, when I heard it. I peeked through the lace curtain, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Dorian and Vera, standing side by side in clean casual clothes, holding a bottle of wine like a peace offering. He knocked again. I didn't move. Inside, laughter bubbled from the living room, where Linda was telling a story about her youngest grandchild. Ruth passed around a bowl of buttered rolls. The room was full, not just with people, but with something that had been missing in every interaction with Dorian for months: sincerity. The doorbell rang a second time. Still, I stayed still. Then Ruth raised her glass. "To those who show up," she said. I lifted mine too, and added quietly, "To those who show up, not just for photos, but for love." They knocked twice. We never heard it. The first screenshot came on Tuesday morning. Gloria from the choir sent it without a message, just the image. A post from Vera's Instagram story, soft filtered and captioned with 3 laughing emojis. The photo wasn't of people. It was my living room, the dining table I had kept since 1992, the lamp my sister gave me before she passed, the old blue chair with the crocheted cushion that Walter used to nap in. The caption read, "So retro it hurts." I sat down on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone a little tighter than necessary. It wasn't what she said. It was what it meant. She had been in my home, accepted my furniture as a gift, then paraded it like a prop in a museum of mockery. 10 minutes later, a second screenshot arrived, this time from Trina, my cousin in Austin. A tweet from Dorian. Just words. "Some people mistake control for love. Just because you raise someone doesn't mean you own them." It wasn't tagged, but it didn't need to be. I turned the phone over and left it face down on the nightstand. Walked through the house without turning on any lights. Past each piece of furniture like it had been cursed overnight. My walls felt louder, echoing things they'd never said, but somehow still held. Later, I went out to the store for milk. At the checkout line, I felt it before I saw it, those sideways glances. People who usually smiled, nodded, asked about my Sunday desserts. Now, they looked right through me, or worse, too directly. Pity, judgment. I couldn't tell which was worse. As I walked to the car, Diane from down the street caught up to me. "Hey, Ardelia," she said, almost too gently. "I heard about, well, you know. Just wanted to say, you're stronger than me. I'd have let them in." I looked at her for a long moment, not angry, not defensive, just tired. "They never knocked for the right reason," I said. She opened her mouth to reply, then thought better of it. I got in my car, drove home in silence. That evening, I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. I wasn't sad, not exactly. It was more like a stillness, a knowing that settles into your skin. Then, as if the universe wanted to remind me I hadn't disappeared entirely, my phone buzzed again. A message from Amanda, daughter of my old neighbor, Mrs. Carson, who passed last fall. My mom used to say you were the only one who remembered her anniversary after Dad died, Amanda wrote. She told me that meant more than any casserole or card. It wasn't meant to heal anything, but it did. A little. I looked at the ceiling and whispered a thank you to whatever part of Mrs. Carson still lingered. The next morning, I logged out of every app, Instagram, Facebook, the family WhatsApp thread, not in anger, not in retreat, in release. I took a sticky note, wrote one line, and pressed it onto the fridge door. Let them talk. You lived it. I smiled, a small, true thing, and went about making breakfast. The loudest stories fade. The real ones echo longer. The phone didn't ring. The mailbox stayed empty. No calls from Dorian. No follow-ups from Vera. Not even another snide social media post to stir the pot. Just silence. But silence has weight. It presses into the cracks of your walls, settles behind your eyes, and folds into the sound of your own footsteps. It doesn't scream, but it lingers longer than shouting ever could. And after the Memorial Day dinner, that silence wasn't an accident. It was strategy. They were waiting for me to cave, for the guilt to claw its way into my chest and force me to beg for peace. But what they hadn't realized yet was this: some silences aren't empty. Some are earned. One afternoon, while watering my porch plants, I got a text from Trisha, my second cousin's daughter. It was a screenshot of a group chat, one of those extended family threads I hadn't been in for months. There he was, Dorian, my son. She's not bad, he typed. She's just stuck in her ways, resists change, holds grudges. It was his way of making himself look gentle, the rational peacemaker, the one burdened by a mother too rigid to adapt. I stared at the message once, then pressed delete. I didn't need to read it again. I knew that play. Twist the story just enough to keep your hands clean. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the neighbor's elm tree, I received another message, this one from Narina. We'd been friends in college, back when we wore our hair big and our hope even bigger. You're stronger than this, she wrote. You don't need to prove anything. Just let them be. Family always finds its way back. I stared at her words for 10 full minutes. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed slowly. You've never had to be erased to know what strength looks like. She didn't reply, and I didn't need her to. 2 days later, I went to church. Not for service, just to drop off a batch of hymnals I'd prepared for the choir. I tried not to draw attention, but as I passed through the side hallway, a woman I barely knew from the garden committee stopped me. I just wanted to say, she whispered, your son used to glow when he looked at you. I still remember. I didn't cry. I smiled, quietly, gratefully, and walked out into the hot morning sun. By the time I got home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. That night, I walked into my dining room, the same room where I had hosted every holiday, every birthday, every just because Sunday meal. The extra chair still sat at the table. I walked over and pulled it out, not in anger, not in grief. I lifted it gently, carried it to the garage, and leaned it against the wall. Dusty, worn, but intact. It was never about the chair. It was about the space I kept making for people who'd already decided not to show up. If they wouldn't speak their truth, I had no reason to keep saving them a seat. It came from a number I didn't recognize. Just a single line. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I didn't need to ask who sent it. The punctuation gave it away. Cold, final, like a verdict read out loud. Vera never did learn how to hide a blade behind a smile without leaving fingerprints. I took a screenshot. Then I deleted it. Not to forget, but to close the file. I had no intention of writing back. Some messages speak more of the sender than the recipient, and this one reeked of someone furious she no longer had power over me. That morning, I took a walk around the block. The breeze had cooled just enough to bring out the dog walkers and retired neighbors pruning their rose bushes. I nodded to each of them, waving to a new couple unloading boxes into the pale blue house at the corner. No one mentioned Vera. No one asked about Dorian. There was a peace in that, being seen for who I was, not the scandal I'd been painted as. When I got home, the mailbox was empty. No notes begging for reconciliation, no invitations to future baby showers, no holiday cards signed in passive ink. For once, I felt no weight as I flipped through nothing. Inside, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and opened the folder of scanned photos again. These weren't for anyone but me now. Family portraits, handwritten birthday notes, sticky-fingered childhood drawings. I added a line to the final page. History isn't made by inclusion. It's preserved by memory. That afternoon, I got a call from Mrs. Langford down the street. Her grandson was in town. She asked if I'd come by for Sunday lunch. Just a few people. No big event. I said yes. When I arrived on her porch that Sunday, the smell of baked macaroni and stewed green beans floated through the open screen door. A pitcher of iced tea sat on the table. There were only 5 of us. Nothing fancy, just conversation, shared glances, small laughs that filled the room like a song no one had to sing out loud. No one asked about Vera. No one brought up Dorian. And yet, I'd never felt more present in a space, not because I belonged by blood, but because someone made room. Later that night, I walked into the dining room again. The same chair I had removed weeks ago remained gone. The table looked balanced, as if the vacancy was finally honest. I stood at the head of the table, fingertips brushing its polished edge. There was no anger, no regret, just a clear sense of where things stood. If they ever wanted to return, they'd have to bring their own chair. And the apology that never came. The quiet had changed. It no longer pressed like a weight or buzzed like static. It moved gently through the house, settling, not suffocating. The chair that once symbolized absence now simply belonged in the garage, next to the rake and the folding table no one used. My home no longer held its breath, waiting for footsteps that wouldn't return. Each item inside these walls had a story, and for the first time in a long while, none of them hurt to remember. The mirror by the front door reflected only what stood there now, not what had walked away. My reflection looked calm, lived in, rooted. I made dinner early that evening, nothing fancy, grilled chicken with rosemary from my garden, a sliced tomato with cracked pepper, and a glass of sweet tea with lemon. I laid a single place setting, no centerpiece, no extra glass just in case. I sat down, folded the napkin across my lap, and smiled, not at a memory, but at the fullness of the present. This meal wasn't for a guest. It wasn't a performance. Every bite was mine, and every moment belonged to no one but me. After washing the last dish, I went to the hall closet and pulled out the old fireproof box. Inside were letters. One addressed to Dorian, one to Vera, one with no name, just folded paper that had started as a letter to myself but became something else. I carried them to the back porch. The ceramic bowl I used to burn dried herbs sat in the corner, unused since Walter passed. I placed each letter inside, struck a match, and held the flame until it caught. The paper curled inward, blackening softly. The smoke rose with a kind of grace. No rush, no fury, just release. I didn't cry. I didn't watch until the ashes cooled. I stepped back inside and closed the screen behind me. A few days later, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No name on the return label, just a child's handwriting on the front. Ms. Ardelia. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper with colored pencil scribbles and a short sentence. You always remembered my name. That made me feel important. No dramatic declaration, no grand gesture, just a quiet truth I didn't know had landed anywhere. I walked it inside and opened the drawer in the sideboard, one I had recently labeled Keep. Inside were concert programs, postcards, a photo of my father fishing, and now this note. As the afternoon wore into dusk, I returned to the porch, sat in my old rocking chair, and watched the sun melt behind the rooftops. The wind moved through the pecan trees without asking permission. I liked that about the wind. It didn't need an invitation to belong. I exhaled. They had taken the seat I once saved. They had left behind their version of truth and their polished excuses. They had made space for absence and called it peace. But what's left here, every inch, is finally mine. They say time heals, but I've learned that time just clears the noise so you can hear your own truth louder. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get the kind of reunion you see in movies. What I got instead was something quieter and maybe more powerful: clarity. Sometimes peace isn't about making things right with others. It's about making things right with yourself and standing in a life that no longer asks you to shrink to fit. Have you ever had to let go of someone you still love, just to hold on to yourself? If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your own life, drop a 1 in the comments or share where you're watching from. And if it didn't speak to you, I'd love to know why. Every story hits differently, and your voice matters too. If you want more stories that speak honestly, gently, and with strength, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. There's more healing ahead. There's more truth to tell.